Guys, I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to make a dress for Second Life, starting with Marvelous Designer, then going into Blender, and then uploading to Second Life, and then sizing from ToddleeDoo to the Bebe Toddler body. And this will be in two parts. This is the dress that we'll be making. So yeah, let's get in. If you haven't already, I did a tutorial on how to set up your Marvelous Designer. I will link that in the description for anyone that has not had their Marvelous Designer set up. So first, we are going to start with the bodice portion of the dress, which is this upper portion right here. And let's go ahead and come in here. So there's a few different things that you want to know beforehand. This is the pattern tool. It lets you draw out the patterns, and we're going to be using this for the majority of the dress. So to start out with a bodice, we want, I want it to kind of end right here, and we want it to come just about here. Come down. And if you're unfamiliar with the mechanics of Marvelous Designer, when it turns this purple color, then that means that it's going straight and it's snapped. So we're just going to, I want it to come about there. And you want it to come away from the body because it has to wrap around. We're probably going to pull it a little bit further too. So here we have our pattern piece in the 3D view. We are going to be changing some of the mechanics of that, but I do want to make this come out just a little bit more and probably down just a little bit. Now I like to get it all set up before we copy and paste it. So this allows you to create curves. And if you have ever seen any kind of sewing pattern, the armholes kind of looks like a little bit of backward J, or I guess that wouldn't be backwards, the other one would be. But that looks good. And this little area will be cleaned up in just a second when we switch the things on that. Then we're gonna pull this down to make the neckline, and again, it'll be cleaned up. And so I like to have mine at 10. When I'm making for child avatars on the ToddleeDoo body, 10 I found works best for me. This is something that you just want to mess around with. Sometimes I'll put it a little bit lower and sometimes I'll put it a little bit bigger, just depending on how smooth I want the fabric to be. And then we are going to come down here and select remesh, which turns it into this pretty grid. And see, that made it to where that's good. Now, I do see where we have this. Anytime you are doing a curve, you want to make sure that this line does not go further. So it should just be perpendicular to it. It should not be down here like this because it makes it to where that comes down, and that's not what we want. So that looks good. And the reason for that is when we sew the back of the bodice onto it, then it's going to create a point. So it'll, instead of it being just a smooth circle around, like instead of it just being a smooth thing, then it will indent in, and we don't want that. So I'll just make sure that it's going just perpendicular. And then you want to come up here and select the pattern piece. And we're going to do Control D, which is going to duplicate and move the symmetrics. Okay, so this one is a little bit down, so we want to make it come a little bit up. Same thing with here. There are times where you'll want it to be lower, but for the most part, you generally don't. And whatever I do to this pattern piece happens over here too. So see? That's what the Control D does. It duplicates the pattern and adds symmetric editing, which is what we want. And that looks good. Then we are going to Control C and then Control V. Oops, wrong thing. I need to select both of these for that. So we copy it over both. And the only difference that I do when I create a back, unless there's like a different pattern for the back, like if you're doing like a one shoulder, then this wouldn't necessarily work. But the only thing that I do is I just switch these, and then with the backs, then it kind of comes up and looks like that. So now we have our back piece. And we're just gonna drag it over this way. And then you want to do Control G, which flips the pattern. Now we are going to sew the bodice. So because we have the symmetric editing, then when we sew these things together, we only need to sew on one. So we're going to do the segment sewing, which does the whole line. This one is the free sewing, and we do this when we like attach a sleeve or anything like that, where you don't want it to sew the entire line. This one does not have any sleeves, so we won't need to do that. And then you want to do insides with insides and outsides with outsides, but it does it over here. And then we just want to make sure that everything looks okay. We don't have any crisscrossing. Nope, everything looks good. Let me switch one of these. So if you get one that looks like this, then that means that your edge over here is going to be sewn to the inside here, and that's not what we want. So it's really, really easy to fix. You can either delete the sewing and redo it, or you can come over here. This is the Edit Sewing tool, and just right click and reverse sewing. And then it's lined up nicely. All right, and then we are going to push space, and that's going to sim. And then this is when we want to do all of the adjustments. So the back looks good. If you have like looser fabric, then this is where you'll be able to like do your wrinkles or anything. Like if you have like a shirt coming out of pants, then you can kind of maneuver it and make it look wrinkled. But I like the way that this looks. It works good. So I'm going to space again to get out of the sim. And then because I like the way that this lays and I don't want the bodice to be pulled down when I sew the skirt on, then I'm going to go ahead and freeze these. And to freeze them, what you do is you do Control K on your keyboard while you're inside of the 2D window. And you know when it's frozen when it is blue. Now, the way that I know a project is completely done is once the entire thing is blue, then that means that I have it how I want it. So that's how I know that I'm completely finished with a project. And let's go ahead and make this skirt. Now, the skirt on this dress is a high-low skirt, so it's higher in the front than in the back. Yeah, we'll do that. I'll show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a curve in the back, and then we're going to put a slight up curve in the front so that it kind of matches. I'll show you. So with this piece, then in sewing, you usually want if you're gonna have any kind of ruffle or anything, then you want to do 2 times. This one doesn't, like if I was doing like a poofy skirt, then I would do 2 to 3 times, but this one kind of lines up pretty close. It's more flared down at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it come out about here and right about where I want it to be. That's the knees. So I'm going to go just a little bit down from the knees. And we have our pattern piece. And this is going to be the front. Now, this one you might not need to change from 20. I usually do skirts like this at 15. So I'm going to change it to 15 and then do this. The lower or the higher the number, the lower the prim count is going to be, and the lower uh, lower poly count. So something to keep in mind. And because we have 2 segments on the bodice and 1 segment on the skirt, then we're going to want to add a point in the skirt. And the way that we do that, or the way that I do it, is you want to go to this edit tool. And it's right here. It lets you select the different, like I can select just a point or anything that I want to edit. And then I will right click this top part and split. And it's going to put a point where I had my mouse. So when you're doing pleats and stuff, then this is also how you do that. But we want uniform split, and it's going to put it in 2, and it's going to put it right in the middle. So that's what we want. And then now that we have that sorted and it's right where we want it here, I might want it to be just a little bit less though, because I don't want it to be too poofy. We aren't doing like a princess dress. Yeah, that should work. And then we are going to Control C, Control V, because we don't want the symmetric pattern, because that sometime that'll mess it up, because we have this one's going to be just a little bit up and this one's going to come down. Okay. Bring it back here. Control G to flip horizontally. And then we need to sew it. So we're going to do the segment sewing again. And we're going to sew this one to this one, this one to this one. It's all very repetitive. You want to make sure that your notches line up. So do you see how I have the notch on the inside on here and then the notch on the inside here and inside here? That tells you the direction that your sewing is going to be. So if I put it on the outside, then it would reverse the sewing, like how I talked about with these. And we don't want that. So we're going to reverse that sewing. And then we're going to sew the sides together. And you can sew inside of here. I just prefer here. So like we can do this and this. When I'm sewing on like a sleeve or something, if it's a ruffle sleeve and I don't want it to go all the way down, then I will watch where I'm sewing in here, but actually sew on this part. Okay, so now we are going to sim. Perfect. So there's a little bit more wrinkles up front than I would necessarily like, but that's easy to fix. We just do this and just bring it a little bit back. That should be okay, because there is a little bit. And what we want to do is now put in a curve. So on this one, this is the front. So I'm going to curve this just slightly. I don't want it to be too much, but just a slight up curve. And then this one, I want it to curve down. It usually these high-low things, you do quite a bit more on the back than you do on the front. I've done these, then I just try and go for like a S. And then we're going to sim again. Ta-da! Now, I do want it to be a little bit more flared, especially for rigging. Rigging it is easier if it's more flared. So the way to do that is, or the way that I do it, there's a few different ways that you can do it, but I don't want it to be all the way flared. So I'm going to turn the pressure up. So I'm gonna do, or turn it down, so -1. Oh, oops, sorry, wrong way. I actually want 1. And then I'm gonna turn it down to 0. And I'm going to, there we go. So when I did that, then I just simmed and unsimmed really fast. Another way that you can do it, and I've done this way before, is do an underskirt. So you have like another skirt underneath it, only in Marvelous Designer, and you have that one be flared. And then this one just lays down on top of it, and that works as well. But for this one, then I want it to not be so flared, but just enough that rigging is not going to be a nightmare. And I think that that's a good length. Now we're going to freeze the skirt and we're going to do the collar. So collars can usually, they're kind of a pain, but there's a few different ways that I've found that make it easy for me, and you would just see which way works best for you. Because this collar lays pretty flat, then the way that I like to do these is I like to make a pattern piece out of the actual bodice part. So we're going to offset as internal line, and however big this is, this line, that's how big our collar is going to be. So if we notice, then it comes quite far. It almost touches the outside. So we're going to make it quite big. About there. That works. And then we're going to push OK, and it's going to put it on both. We also want it on this back. So we're going to offset this internal line. Then we are going to cut this and cut this. And then, now there's probably easier ways to do this. This is just how I've done it and found that it works best for me. So then we're going to Control C and Control V and just paste these right on top. And then we are going to do this and merge. And same with these. Sometimes the back ones don't like to cooperate very much. Aha, good, it did. And then we have our collar piece up here, and it's going to match up perfectly to our top right here. So we are going to, oh, we already have the sewing. That's good. Sometimes the sewing doesn't transfer over. We are going to delete this sewing though. We're going to sew this here, and we're going to sew this here. Oh, and cannot forget about unfreezing. So again, we're going to just push Control K to unfreeze. And then just going to bring that down now that this is rounded out on the thing that it's a round collar, I'll show you how to do that once we get this sewn. So we're gonna come back over here and sim. So it always will lay funny like that. But if we come over here to our pressure and we do negative, that was a bit much, then we can have it lay pretty flat. And usually what I will do is once I get it how I want it to be, oops, then I will freeze that particular pattern piece. So I really like how the back is. So I'm gonna freeze the whole back. And then I'll sim again, bring this over here. I do need to make these into a rounded collar though. So let's do that. To merge these two though. So that's how we make it into one pattern piece. These will not be merged though. Sometimes, like if it's a collar that connects, then I'll merge it, but this one does not. So what we are going to do is we are going to delete point. Oh, never mind, it says no to that. Okay, so instead, what we do is we turn this into a curve. And this. There we go. So now we have our curved edge. And I like where this one is sitting, so I'm gonna go ahead and freeze it. And then we'll just maneuver this one a little bit. There we go. And you do want it to come away from the actual thing. So that looks good to me. All right, here we go. Yeah, that looks good. So now we are going to merge. Oh, and delete those points because I don't need those. So we're gonna merge these. So it's gonna put the bodice, the front in one. So it's gonna be one pattern piece, and then we're going to merge this. And now we get to set up faces. Everything looks good. So the way that you set up the faces is, put this down here. Sorry. I like to keep these things all aligned. The way that we set up faces is we change them over here. So all of these are on the same face because they're all on fabric 1. If you have different fabric types, then this is also where you'll change those. But because this dress is made out of the same fabric type, then we didn't do that. But like if I'm doing like denim and then cloth, like if it's a denim top and then a cloth skirt part, then I'll change the fabric type in here. But this one is all one, so we can just keep it at the same. But we do want these to be different faces because in SL, then you need, each of them are different faces. And that's how you texture. So I want the collar to be one face, the bodice to be one face, and the skirt to be one face. way that we do that is we just assign and it creates a new one. So anything that is highlighted when you have each of the faces, so like this one shows you that all of those are in that face, and this one shows that the collar is in that face. So now we want to change these, and we're going to assign, and now we have the skirt, and I will go ahead and rename these. And inside a blender, your material faces will be whatever you name these. So really, really important to name these unless you want to get confused. This one is the collar, and this one is the bodice. Oops. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we are going to set up the UV maps. And this one we're going to have two UV maps, the bodice and the collar, and then the skirt on a different UV map. So the way that we do that, we switch from simulation to UV editor, and it's always going to have the 3D on this side. But and the square that we're working with is this one. Now, this is something that I do. It's not necessarily something that is required. I think that it just makes it nicer. If it's the same fabric type or the same if you do a pattern and it's going to be the same thing or this similar, then I will size them all at once. I won't size each individual thing. I'll size them all and we'll just make it go up till there that. Okay, so down here we have the, oh, we might have to have it be a little bit smaller. So the UV, the box that we need to keep it in is this box right here that has the highlighted Y and X axis. So we're gonna move this down, see, oh, oops. Okay, and I try and keep it, I mean, just a little bit, but I want to get rid of that one and then bring this down. Okay, so we will need to make it just a little bit smaller. Oops, just a tad bit. There we go. So now we have that one in there, and we're just going to grab these and we're going to drag them over here. Perfect. So that's it set up. Now this is a relatively easy UV map to set up. I have had some quite complicated ones where you have to maneuver stuff, but luckily we just have an easy one. So there we go. And then we're going to switch back over to simulation. And now we need to save our project. So I'm going to save as project and let me just create a new folder really fast. Okay. Uh, Sorry, it decided to give me issues. Okay, so we're just going to save this as tutorial. And then we're going to select everything that we want to export um, as one. So because this is one piece, we don't have like shirt, pants, cardigan. Um, we're just going to do select it as one. And then you want to export OBJ selected. It's very important. Otherwise you'll grab the avatar too. We don't want that. So I'm just going to do our dress. Now we want it to be welded, thin, and we want it to take the UV coordinates and then meter and make sure none of these are selected, none of the invert. Otherwise texturing will be a nightmare and that's not what you want. So we're going to push OK. And so that's this portion of the tutorial. For part 2, we're going to be doing the Blender side. So the rigging, uploading to Second Life, testing out the rig, and sizing it to, and baking it and sizing it to the Bebe Toddler body. All right. So thank you for joining me for part 1, and I hope to see you in part 2.